We've already talked about auxiliaries a lot in this course. Right back in the first grammar lecture on parts of speech, we introduced auxiliaries and talked about the difference between modal and primary auxiliaries. At that point, we advised you to learn all the auxiliaries because they go with verbs, so they can help you to find the main verb in a clause. When we looked at verb phrase structure, we talked about their position in the verb group and how any modal auxiliaries will always precede primary auxiliaries if they occur together. But because of the fact that we've had so much else to focus on, up until now we have not talked a great deal about the role of the primary auxiliaries. In tutorials, your tutor might have pointed out how one of the ways that you can pick that a form of be is an auxiliary rather than a copula is if what comes next has ing on it, as in she's running. Your tutor might have pointed out that the is and the ing go together, but we haven't covered the details of what's going on there in the lectures so far. Looking at the details of the job that primary auxiliaries are doing in the verb group will be our last grammar topic for the course. In this lecture, we will look at tense, which only involves looking at auxiliaries a little bit. The following two lectures will then be on aspect and on passive voice. These involve using auxiliaries. And finally, in the last lecture, we will have a summary of what happens when you have more than one primary auxiliary together. All English clauses have to have tense marks somewhere in the clause, with an exception that we'll get to in a minute. There are just two tenses in English, past and present. It's the form of one of the verbs in the verb group that tells us what the tense is. It's important that you keep in mind what I just said as we progress through the next few lectures. It is the form. Sometimes you might feel that a clause is past, for example, because the event has already taken place, but that isn't always so. Present tense is indicated either by the base form of the verb, or, if the subject is third person singular, the suffix s. So this is as in, I play, she plays, you sleep, or he sleeps. Past tense is marked by the suffix ed on regular verbs and with a variety of different forms on irregular verbs. Some regular forms are I played, she climbed, he washed. Irregular past tense forms are those such as I slept, she ran, he stood. Some people will argue that we also have a future tense in English. However, there isn't a suffix which is used to mark the future, like the present s ending or the past ed. Instead, to express the future, we use the auxiliary will plus a main verb. I will play, she will climb, he will sit. This brings me to the exception I mentioned, when a clause is not marked for tense. Traditionally, it has been said that there are present and past tense forms of the modals, that would is the past tense form of will, should is the past tense of shall, and so on. Saying this doesn't really make sense for the way we use English today. Let's just look at a couple of examples to illustrate that. She should go next week. She should have gone last week. Both of these clauses have should in them, but one is referring to a potential event in the future, and the other is referring to an event in the past that did not occur. While should might have been a past tense form in the past, for the way we use English today, it makes no sense to say should, as in she should go next week, is past. So we say that tense is marked except in clauses where there is a modal auxiliary, in which case these are tenseless clauses. If there is more than one verb in the verb group, in other words, if, as well as the main verb, there is one or more primary auxiliary, then only one of them can be marked for tense. Pay attention to what I'm going to say next, because it's a really important point to remember and will really help you when you are analysing the verb group in a clause. Tense is always marked on the first verb in the verb group. So if we only have the main verb in the verb group and no primary auxiliaries, then the main verb gets marked for tense. So we have he plays and she drinks beer in the present tense, and she played and she drank beer with the irregular drank in the past tense. If there is one primary auxiliary in the verb group, that primary auxiliary is where the tense gets marked. The main verb then takes one of the participle forms. It's important to note that the participles are not tenses, even though they are called present participle and past participle. In fact, each participle form can combine with primary auxiliaries in either the present or the past tense. So for example, we see he is playing and he is played with the present tense forms of the auxiliaries, is as a present tense form of be, and has as a present tense form of have. And he was playing and he had played with the past tense forms of the auxiliaries, was as a past tense form of be, and had as the past tense form of have. You may find it strange to think of he has played as present tense. You might think, but hasn't he already played, so isn't it in the past? It is present tense because the auxiliary has is present tense. Remember that tense is only marked once in the verb group, and it is always on the first verb. So we only look at the first verb when deciding what tense a clause has. Exactly what is going on here with the auxiliary have and the past participle form of the verb will be explained in detail in the next lecture on aspect. The difference between present tense, he has played, and past tense, he had played, should become clearer after watching that video. If there is more than one primary auxiliary in the verb group, tense is marked on the first auxiliary. Again, the main verb and the other primary auxiliary, or auxiliaries, appear in one of the participle forms. So we have, he has been playing and the car is being washed, with the present forms of the auxiliaries, has and is. And he had been playing and the car was being washed, with the past forms of the auxiliaries, had and was. The details about the forms of the other auxiliaries and main verb will be covered in the next lecture. In summary, the English system of tense is fairly straightforward. There are only two tenses, present and past. There is no future tense as such in English. Future events are generally indicated by using the modal auxiliary will. This is not a tense, as it is not marked on the verb. The most important thing that you need to remember is that tense is only marked once in each clause, and that it is always marked on the first word in the verb group. That is, either it is indicated on the main verb, if there are no auxiliaries, or it is marked on the first primary auxiliary. If there is a modal auxiliary first, there is no tense in the clause.